Hey everyone, I wanted to do a fairly short video on how we can fine-tune our animations in MODO. And to do that, I'm just going to start with this cube and make it rotate over the duration of my scene. So I'm going to just go into setup here, or sorry, animate rather, and let's move this window up a little. We're going to start a couple of frames in, let's say 24 frames in, and we're going to key the rotation for this. And then we'll go to somewhere around, let's do 96 frames, so 1 second before the end of the animation. And we're going to animate this as going clockwise to negative 360 degrees in Y. And if we hit play, we see it like is spinning, but it's not spinning at a constant rate. It's kind of starting from the stop position, speeding up a little bit, and then slowing down as it hits the last frame there, last keyframe there. And that's because by default, MODO is going to interpolate your animation to be kind of smooth and natural looking. But we could change that by controlling the curves that MODO assigns to each animation that we create. You can see those curves by using this button here, and that's going to bring up our graph editor as well as our what's called dope sheet. So if I stop this right now, the dope sheet is just going to be essentially the same keyframes we see down here, except you should see a little bit more detail in them. But the graph editor is where things get interesting. And the graph editor will always show values on the object you have selected. So right now I have this cube selected and it's showing my cube and the three properties that have keys on them: rotation X, rotation Y, and rotation Z. X, Y, and Z only have a keyframe at frame 24, and Y also has a keyframe at 96. Okay, so what this curve is telling me is at frame 24, the value of Y is 0 degrees, and then at frame 96, the value of Y is negative 360 degrees. So you can kind of see over here, the value isn't changing so suddenly. Then towards here, it's changing more drastically per frame, and then here it's slowing back down. And that's what we're seeing in our animation as well. So it speeds up and then it slows down. Now if I were to grab any of these keyframes, I can get this little curve handle, kind of like our Bezier curve, and that's going to let me modify that. So if I was to change it to look like this, what the graph is now saying is it stays around 0, very slowly moving, and then suddenly it changes and rotates to 360 degrees, right? So if we go back here and hit play, we're going to see it slowly move, and then pretty suddenly it jumps over, and it even stops very suddenly, right? Like jumps and then stops. So if I hit stop there, and I was to, let's say, move this down, so now this curve is essentially saying it's going to go from 0 past 360 and then come back up to negative 360, right? So if we look at this, what we should see is the cube passes where it's supposed to stop and then it comes back. So you can see right there, it goes and then flips back a little, right? We can kind of play around with this, grab this handlebar, maybe make it like that, jumps too far and then slides back a little bit, So in playing with these curves, I've essentially only had 2 keyframes, but I've given the animation a lot more detail by controlling just how it's going from one keyframe to the next, right? I didn't have to add another keyframe in the middle to say, for example, in this case, let me just undo a little bit. So I didn't have to go to like frame 60, let's say, and go to a much more negative value, so maybe like negative 480, but that produces a similar curve, right? So it's like it goes from 0 to negative 480 and then it comes back to negative 360. I don't really need to have that many keyframes to worry about if I just go in and play with these handlebars. And I can do that on both sides, so I can say, hey, actually, let's kind of rev up by going backwards and then start to spin and then go past my endpoint and come back to it, right? So it's going to, now if we hit play, it's going to kind of go backwards, then spin, and then come back a little bit, right? So using these curves, you can kind of really get a lot of detail and add character to your animations. I know this is a simple example, but essentially you want to know, for whatever you're changing, what the value is here, and this value will always be time. So in rotation, this is degrees. In your move tool, it might be meters or millimeters, and in your scale, it will be a percentage for your scale, right? Now, a couple of other things we have here are these pre-built interpretation models. So it will, by default, give you an automatic interpolation of this curve, which is what it looked like when we started. This button here will let us kind of manually move all of these, which you don't really actually have to hit. This one is smooth. It's pretty much close to the default, so you won't see much of a difference there, right? This one here is going to flat everything out. So if I did change something like this, so like that, and if I was to grab that keyframe, but press that button, it's going to flat out the handle. Do the same thing here, flat out that handle. This one here is where it gets interesting. So linear will give me a linear or constant rotation there. So now if I hit play, it's going to start and end, like it's going to start, rotate, and end at the same speed. And just so you can see an example of this, what we'll do here is we'll duplicate this cube. That will duplicate it with the animation. I'm going to move it over here. And then on this one, I'm going to go back to auto. And we should see the difference between these two. We hit play. You see that one's spinning consistently. This one is kind of starting up, speeding up, and slowing down, right? Okay. And then the last one, last button we have here. Actually, let's do this on a. We will do this on a different shape. So let's press F2, throw in a torus. Move this here, and we're gonna key the. We'll do the scale on the torus. So we'll go to our scale tool, key it. Let's do frame 24 again. Key it there. Frame 96. We'll key it here as well, and then at frame, let's do 48. We'll say this is going to be 150, 150, 150. And at frame 72, we're going to make this 50%. So right now, if we just look at this torus and we hit play, it's going to grow and shrink, and you can kind of see what this curve is doing. So the size gets larger, smaller, and then back to where it started. If we were to change this to linear, we would see that change. It's more constant, right? But if we were to change this to stepped, what this will do is basically keep one value until another value comes and takes over. So now it's kind of jumping between those values that I've keyframed, right? So we can use this to kind of control other variables. So for example, if we have a light, let's go in and throw a, we'll use a point light there. We'll move this over. Right. Hit stop. Now with this light we have our intensity, right? So if we were to say this light turns on over time, you know, let's say at frame 24, it's at 0, we key that, and then at frame 48, we'll key this at 3. Between those two frame numbers, we're going to see that light brighten up, right? And you can see that right there, and you can see that in the value over here as it's increasing. And if we go down to in our point light to the intensity, you can see it has this dot telling me there's animation on it. You can see there's the value. Here it says meters, but it's actually your intensity right there. But yeah, if one more thing to remember, if you want to kind of see a better view of this, you can select your keyframes here and press A, and it will kind of re-display it. You can also use your Alt key to kind of move around here, and mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Right? So yeah, we have our intensity kind of going from one value to the other. But if we wanted it to just kind of turn on at frame 48, we would also go back and just do a linear, or sorry, a stepped interpolation. And so that's going to keep it as 0 until that frame. So now if I hit play, you see it's off, and then it flicks on, right? And it's happening the same time that that torus is getting to a larger size. Okay? So a stepped interpolation is essentially kind of on and off, or sudden jumps, rather than actually changing over time. Another example of this kind of stepped interpolation is if you were to animate anything that has a check mark or a checkbox like this, volumetrics. So if you remember volumetrics here, let's actually just pull up a preview window. Play. So volumetrics will kind of give you this like glow around your light. I'm going to let's drop the intensity of this at my keyframe to maybe 1. Let's try 0.5, something like that. We'll also just move this up a little bit. Okay, so the volumetrics are on right now, and if we go back down to it, we see that it has this dot next to it, meaning we can animate that. If we were to go to frame 60 and click that, volumetrics will be on for my entire duration of my entire scene. So even as this is kind of getting brighter over time, that volumetric light is on. If I went to frame 72 right now and then turned it off, since it's a checkbox like that, if we look at the animation for volumetrics, that's always going to be a stepped interpolation. So even if I was to click any of these buttons here, it's going to give me the same result as it has. So it's going to stay on until it's off, right? And you can see here the value of on is 1 and the value of off is 0. And if we go in this animation, you see it's on, it's on, it's on, and then at frame 72 it's off, and that will stay off unless we turn it back on. And now what's going to happen is it's going to stay on and then off for a bit and then on again. So just keep in mind that anything with the checkbox is going to kind of keep that stepped interpolation, and it's just going to show as a value between 1 and 0, or either 1 or 0. Right? So another thing that you can do in this window that's kind of interesting is you can set up a few keyframes and then have the program kind of repeat those keyframes. So for example, let's just let's start a new scene. So throw in a sphere. We will key the sphere, start it at frame 0 with the position it's in, and then at frame 24 we'll key it up here, And if we take this animation here that we have this behavior section, and the first one is the behavior pre the start of your scene, and or pre the first keyframe, and the second is the behavior after your last keyframe. So right now they're both set to constant, meaning it's staying at that value. If I was to say change this to oscillate, it's going to kind of copy those keyframes. If I do oscillate smooth, it's going to interpret the beginning of this kind of end of the keyframe rather as a smooth curve, so it will smoothly go up and down. And now if I hit play, you should see this goes up, down, and I only have the 2 keyframes, right? You can see I also have like the option for linear, which will make it kind of copy that same curvature over and over. If we were to go back to oscillate smooth and move this kind of forward, right now my object is not going to move until frame 50, which is where that first keyframe is, and then it will keep going back and forth, right? If I was to make this kind of happen quicker by moving these keyframes closer together, you'll see that oscillation will also move, kind of interpret so that it runs multiple times, right? And if I was to go in here and say, oh, at frame, is that 59? I don't want it to go that high, so let's make only go that far up. Then all of those other repeats are going to do the same. And if I change the pre-behavior here to also oscillate smoothly, then it doesn't really matter where my keyframes are. It's going to do that behavior from the beginning of my scene. Okay, so these 2 buttons are just basically saying repeat the or interpolate the channel to have these values before and after my first and last keyframe respectively. Okay? If you mouse over this, you can get a kind of description of what each value does. And if you want to play around with this, especially like bouncing balls and stuff, you can get away with just having a few keyframes and using the pre and post behaviors. Alright, that's kind of all I really wanted to discuss for this video. Keep it short and simple. I want you guys to start playing around with the animating and let me know if you run into any issues. Of course, feel free to open up new scenes not related to your assignments and just kind of work on little things like even with simple shapes like this to see how it works and kind of build up your sense of timing